חידה באמצע הדרך, מאת דוקטור אלון גלעדי.
על ליבוביץ הפורמלי והדרך להפרכתו.
The faithful logical prophecy is a human act, including within it faithful thought and wisdom thought, and in its supreme revelation also an act of leadership, and more than that, an act of literary creation. This matter is learned without doubt from a study of the writings accepted by the general monotheistic religions, at whose basis all stand the 5 books of the Hebrew Torah, and also from the rebukes of the prophets regarding the erroneous and the desirable in the existence of this Torah, for their time and for the future to come. But this is not enough to convince from a faithful logical perspective. This matter is learned also, and perhaps mainly, from the very unified essence of the faith and the logical thought. For to be distinguished from the formal requirement of the Rambam, as much as a man approaches the center of the palace, he or she are necessarily required to enact working for the sharing of this achievement with the people. This sharing can receive various forms, but it as itself is situated at the basis of the wisdom and the faith, since this basis is the striving for the revelation of the truth as the ultimate purpose of man. The act of man as a revelation of the logical truth and the faithful truth together is the peak of peaks of the striving toward the ultimate purpose of man, whatever the point of departure of the observer may be in the nature of the research of the relation between man to the being or to the being of God, including him. This ultimate purpose requires sharing with the people, since sharing, or inheritance to the future generations, is requested from the very basic being of man, who he as himself, according to what is known to us, is not immortal. This is a sharing necessarily inviting discussion, refutation, and transcendence from generation to generation. Wherefore it is worthy from a faithful logical perspective that the student shall surpass his teacher. Non-sharing of the struggle of man toward the truth necessarily brings closer the disappearance of the struggle and its results from the consciousness of man as himself, while sharing brings closer its continuity and flourishing. This truth, as far as it is given to the thought of the discoverer only, is deficient from its very essence, and as such contradicts its ultimate purpose. But just as non-sharing in the foundations of the truth distances the approaching to the truth, so sharing in the false foundations of the truth endangers the necessary and unattainable process, since it opens other processes in other directions. And in other words, if the ultimate purpose of the faith and the ultimate purpose of the thought, the absence of sharing the people contradicts as itself the definition of the faithful logical basis as claimed above. By the way, it shall be said immediately that reason dictates that this sharing will be perceived in the eyes of its time as a failure, and even as a resounding failure. No prophet in his city. A prophet is not without honor save in his own country, summarizes this matter in the level of the time and the place, and its logic is clear. As much as man approaches the palace, behold, this is done after an exceptional, faithful logical action. And as much as the closeness to the palace is greater, so greater is the distancing from whoever is not situated there from a consciousness perspective. As much as man ascends in the ladder of the logical faith, he must necessarily go more and more toward himself, to distance from the public, to act contrary to his material nature, and at the same time to share his achievement with the people. On one hand, the possessor of the faithful logical achievement is obligated to share in such or another manner his achievement with the people. And on the other hand, as much as he is closer to the palace, so reason dictates that this cooperation will fail, at least in its time. Therefore, it is customary to see the prophet in the nature of a rebuker in the gate. although in practice it is about a direct result of his essence, which requires usually sharing and failure together, and not in his essence as itself. In this matter, there can be a claim that the approaching will receive a positive turn at the time that the status of the prophet unites with the status of the leader, as a supreme degree of sharing. At the same time, as much as the will to inherit the faithful logical consciousness will be done through coercion in a form of law or other, or charisma or admiration, or means that do not encourage the free faithful thought, but rather the fear and/or the rote learning, and/or the mental opacity. Behold, reason dictates that its failure for its time is situated in its basis. The claim that the worship of God, or more precisely, the effort for the worship of God, including the study of the Torah, depend on the power of the government, or on the religious institutions, is an essential error by definition. The effort for the worship of God and the study of the Torah at their supreme level depend on a solitary ascent to the mountain, on the distancing from the government and the coercion, whose peak is the supreme thought through the supreme free will, the faithful logical thought and action. As much as the will to inherit the faithful logical consciousness will be done through faithful logical means, behold, the way to such an approaching is more reasonable. Therefore, the literary creation is in its essence a more sublime expression of the prophecy than the leadership. The prophecy in its supreme meaning, the conceptual and the practical, but in no way mystical, is as the ultimate purpose of the logical faith, the point of departure for the examination of the thought of Liebowitz. It and no other, and this from the very essence of Liebowitz, as a faithful and logical man as one. The prophecy in its logical faithful meaning, which is not as one piece, just as the truth from the point of view of man includes within it different degrees, which are likened in the palace parable, when the high degree is forever unattainable, by definition. We expect the Messiah who will come, but every Messiah who came in practice is a false Messiah by definition. So there exists the degree of the logical wisdom preceding the prophecy, which is logical faithful together, and that including an act of rebuke, and that including an act of leadership, and the degree of prophecy that does not include creation, and the degree of prophecy including creation, and a degree of prophecy including all of them together, without harming such or another manifestation of the prophecy. Any attempt to examine the thought of Liebowitz from a philosophical point of view only is doomed to failure, because Liebowitz was not a humanist, and the point of departure of his thought is not rooted in man as a point of departure. Furthermore, any attempt for a formal examination of Leibowitz's thought is also doomed to failure because on the face of it, this thought was not a thought at all, and primarily left no original idea, and any system on the face of things, even as the testimony of its owner. Any thought and any phenomenon in this world of the is as they are must necessarily be examined also on their non-revealed aspects, those which are beyond the face of things, to be distinguished from their modes as themselves. True, the Torah spoke in the language of human beings. True, it is not in heaven. But at the same time, a word spoken in its proper modes, from the perspective of the mental consciousness. Leibowitz was without doubt an exceptional personality in its sharpness, and in the decisiveness of its thought, and even in the need to inherit it to the people. At the same time, his decisive public words, especially in the faithful context, are so refuted from within their own logic, until there is seen seemingly a request, and even a requirement of their speaker to explain them from within their refutation. This matter should not surprise at all. but specifically, the non-understanding of it is the surprising. The mental and even the factual thought, and how much more so the faithful thought from their very definition, are not required to the face of things, but to that which is between them, to the trail that God leaves behind him, to the infinite riddle that the being riddles us. Attempts for the understanding of serious thought from a purely formal perspective characterize other failures of understanding, such as the understanding of the Rambam's thought, or the understanding of the refutation of the thought of his negative student, Spinoza. A formal observation only characterizes more severe failures, such as a non-objective understanding of the Torah, and I will require to this later. As was said previously, the most basic things are the simplest things, and these necessarily preceded the most complex things. These things can be situated in the things themselves or between them. Either way, they are not revealed to the thought, to be distinguished from the sensation, to be distinguished from the perception of the senses, and there is a need to act for their understanding. The basic reason for this is because the very process of thought obligates us to translate the reality revealed to us by the senses to something else, to laws, and to laws after the refutation of the laws. As said in the revealed basis of the thought of Liebowitz, stands the claim that one must distinguish between the world of science, which is given and objective and is not subject to any will, between the worlds of the faith and the values which they are given to the will, and the subjective decision of every man and man as he is. A direct result of this is that the conceptual content of this composition, it is worthy for it that it shall open in the refutation of the revealed basis of the thought of Liebowitz, in the refutation of the erroneous distinction between a scientific fact to a moral fact to a faithful fact, and in the new-old placement of a new-old fact, the faithful logical fact. Since it is not about a claim for disagreement, but in the refutation of the claims of the formal Liebowitz, behold, it will be done from within his own view, on its bases in relation to the three worlds which are one according to my claim: the world of science, the world of the theory of wisdom, including the humanistic morality, and the world of faith for its own sake. After drawing conclusions regarding the basis of the formal approach of Liebowitz, I will turn to its immediate results, and at their head to the psychophysical problem derived from this separation, and illustrating it and its error. Here I will seek to correct the claims of Liebowitz regarding the distinction between body and soul, and I will offer a faithful logical basis for the analysis of this issue. At the same time, I will refer to the problem with the definite article, the problem par excellence, standing at the basis of the attempt of Liebowitz for the distinction between body and soul, and it is the problem of the free will. Here I will show that to this important and severe problem, there exists an innovative, faithful logical solution, standing on a more correct ground than that which Liebowitz offered. This new old ground is in practice a modern development of the approach of the Rambam, who acted for the correction of the world of the faith from the direction of the logic, while I seek to show that the essential Liebowitz sought to correct the world of the material logic from the direction of the non-physical faith. After, I will require to the immediate result of the refutation of the formal Leibowitz's distinction between the world of science forced upon man in its symbolic meaning, the body, between the world of values and the faith given to his decision in its essential and symbolic meaning, the soul. I will approach its supreme result from his perspective, and it is, of course, the subject of the worship of God, the status of man before God. Here I will emphasize by way of refutation that the worship of God for its own sake, according to the essential Leibowitz, is a faithful logical worship, and not as his formal and canonical approach regarding the matter of the worship of God according to the existing halakha, which is not as itself faithful logical. But if I claim that the true worship of God is faithful logical, behold, one cannot avoid a discussion on the basis of the modern claim for the separation between the faith and the science, in time and in thought. This basis is situated also in the enlightened and erroneous doctrine of the seemingly logical Spinoza, enlightened by definition, differently from the formal Liebowitz. Therefore, I will precede the discussion regarding the faithful logical worship of God with a short discussion on the conclusions of Spinoza in his theological political treatise. Here I will claim that Spinoza's claims in the logical and the faithful logical context regarding the matter of the separation between the faith and the wisdom are refuted from their foundation, also according to his own system itself. Thus I will seek to show that Spinoza's claim against the Rambam, who seeks to require to the connection between the faith and the wisdom, contrary to the halachic world of his time and of our time, is erroneous from its basis. Here I will show that Spinoza's error is seen from within his own system, which can be refuted, and one must try and refute, like every human system and claim, as it is. But requiring to the point of departure of the separation of the reason from the faith, there is not in it enough, for the development of the Enlightenment sought to decide from within refutation and development, also against that which preceded it. Therefore, it is worthy to require also to the middle and summarizing thought of the Enlightenment regarding the conceptual connection between the science and the faith and its real consequences. Wherefore, I chose to require as a middle point in the development of the logical approach to religion to the excellent position of Kant, to the refutation of its bases, to the requirement for the correction of its result, and in brief, to the summarizing position of the Enlightenment, which is in my view the position of Nietzsche, necessarily preceding the return of the faithful logical God. The meaning of this discussion will be that the basis for understanding the connection between the faith and the reason is not the placing of the reason as a theoretical goal, but as a means for understanding the way to the truth, which is as itself forever will not be revealed. Just as man acts toward the object external to him as part of him, in the sense of its mental, descriptive, objective shaping, behold, he himself sees in his reason an a priori dimension, allowing him to do so in combination with what the senses bring before him. The prominent error of Kant regarding the matter of the connection between the theory of wisdom, the morality, and the religion is not in his critique of pure reason, but specifically, first and foremost, in the critique of practical reason and the moral categorical imperative accompanying it. Liebowitz opposed, in practice, justly to the moral categorical imperative and to the duty derived from it in an objective manner. He is not the only one in this opposition of his. But similar to others, this opposition did not lead in a formal manner to the correction of the error situated in this imperative, but to its cancellation. In this is hidden the beginning of his faithful logical error, of the formal Liebowitz, an error whose basis is in determinations that are not required to a fundamental refutation of the central determinations that preceded them. The error from the field of morality in Kant and Liebowitz is connected to the supreme error from the faithful logical field. In Kant, from the perspective of the connection between the categorical imperative and the meaning of religion within the limits of reason, and in Liebowitz, from the perspective of the denial of the connection between the things. Here I will show that the one religion, the religion of God upon earth existing by definition, which is not given to exhaustion also in Kant, indeed is connected to morality, but it requires a careful, rational reference to the connection with the undefined God, who does not exist in Kant in a real, rational manner, but exists in the essential Liebowitz. Kant approaches the understanding of the true religion, but errs in the way to it, and so too in its results in practice. Similar to Spinoza, it seems that he involves the personal, so very personal, in the conclusions supposed to be detached from the personal, toward a binding, objective rule. And this in all regarding the logical analysis of the fundamental texts of the different monotheistic faiths. An analysis whose corrective foundation is faithful logical. But if Kant erred in the way and approached the result, behold Nietzsche, who summarizes my reference to the Enlightenment in the context of the logical faith, approached in the way and erred formally in the result. Nietzsche parted from Kant, like Liebowitz, in the context of the erroneous categorical imperative from within itself. But instead of separating between the worlds of science, wisdom, and faith, as a kind of throwing up of hands in Liebowitz, he walks in another erroneous logical manner, following the error of Kant, and cancels the worlds of morality and faith entirely. Mine ube. The reference of Nietzsche to God, to the faiths, and to the basis of all things is seemingly nihilistic, but in practice it is exactly the opposite of that. If Liebowitz calls in an esoteric manner for his necessary refutation, behold Nietzsche, for all the logical absurdity of his arguments, requires this openly, insistently. In other words, when Nietzsche claims that God is dead, he requires from us to observe him in a different way than in the past. When he claims that the faiths are forged, he requires from us to correct their development. When he claims that there is no morality and there are no philosophers of truth but of goal, he requires from us to refute his own doctrine, which also, according to this logic, is dependent on a personal goal. The essential Nietzsche requires from us in practice to discover the morality again and again and again anew, while correcting its decadent institutional development. Nihilism, by definition, does not exist, for destruction of the past is connected by its very definition to the past, and the requirement of the truth cannot be based on the claim that there is no real truth and that the basis for human existence is the will to power. The ultimate requirement of Nietzsche for a brave walking in the paths of the truth leads us, in the thought of Nietzsche, to the refutation of his formal doctrine on its face, in absolute contrast to his successors in the modern thought and the postmodern, who acted in an entirely opposite direction, while they cancel their rational ultimate purpose for the research of the truth. According to the essential Nietzsche, we must create something new-old, from within observation of the errors of the past, from within knowledge that also our new-old conclusion will be subject to refutation and correction, and so on and so forth. A direct and natural result of this, as will be clarified below, is that after the refutation of the Enlightenment or logical reference for the purpose of this discussion, a discussion will take place on the derived meaning of the worthy worship of God, or in other words, in the unending progress toward the worthy worship of God. In a logical manner only, it is about, according to Spinoza, in obedience only to the one God according to the undefined grace and mercy. In a logical manner only, it is about, according to Kant, in the understanding of the universal rules situated in the different faiths and standing in line with the categorical imperative of the practical reason, and all this according to the formal Kant, mainly in the religion acting according to universal rules, which is in his system Christianity, as said in the New Testament. On the other hand, in a faithful manner only, it is about a canonical command, which, according to Kant, is a specific command of a specific faith, and is not associated with the universal religion. And according to the formal Liebowitz, it is the true connection to God, meaning the fulfillment of the 613 commandments according to the halakha, which is faithful and not necessarily logical. In contrast to the separate worlds of wisdom and faith, and the world of pure reason and its derivatives, the unified world of the logical faith places us before a new, old, exciting, and additional possibility. And it is the fulfillment of the laws and the commandments and the judgments according to a halakha, which is faithful, logical, which is exemplary. A new, old, and general halakha, learned by the reason as an impartial means in an empirical manner given, and even requiring universal refutation and confirmation. This is a universal, objective halakha that is not subject to the categorical imperative or to regulatory shackles, but acts according to the will, striving for the supreme free will, within the limits of the reason as a means devoid of any bias and partiality, correct for every faith in the one God, and especially to the bases of all the faiths in Him, the book of the Torah. This is a new old halakha, summarized in the term of learning Torah, limud Torah, instead of Talmud Torah. A halakha given to faithful logical refutation at every single time by each and every one of us, without mediating means, and how much more so those that are not faithful logical. In the concluding chapter, which is all of it a beginning, I will explain the solution of a riddle in the middle of the way, which is in one sentence, the transition from Talmud Torah to learning Torah in a faithful, logical manner. In this chapter, I will show that the faithful, logical way to the worship of God will advance us in the paths of the truth through a walking backward, also to the Rambam and to the Guide for the Perplexed, although in a corrective manner, from within a modern, faithful, logical view. This chapter will constitute a parting from the formal Liebowitz toward the essence of a thought striving for constant revelation of the truth, unattainable by definition, or in other words, toward the faithful, logical worship of God as the ultimate purpose of man.